chess is all about pattern recognition, and studying chess is all about how to identify those patterns in a real game. In this video, we're going to take a look at some basic checkmates, as well as how to identify them in a game, based on some games that I've played. Let's get started. The first place I would definitely check out would be my website for this page for how to checkmate your opponent. There are tons of example patterns in here. If you click on the different types of patterns, you can see the back rank checkmate, you can see the staircase checkmate, smothered checkmate, Anastasia. There's lots of different patterns, and I'm going to go through how you can kind of identify some of those in the actual game. The best way to really start to memorize these patterns is to play them out. And Lichess does an amazing job. They just added this feature in just about a week ago for puzzle themes. And if you go down here, you can see mate in one. Now, I would definitely start with that if you're having issues with figuring out how to checkmate somebody quickly. You can click into here and you'll see mate in one. So from here, I want to think about some of those different patterns I have. And I can see here that the king is exposed. And I have my rook and queen lined up to deliver a perfect checkmate. So if I were to place my queen here, that takes away the normal squares plus the diagonal, and I'm already seeing that these squares are taken away. So this is something I see right away, and if you're having trouble with that, these puzzles will definitely help you to figure this out. Let's run through some of the puzzles that Lichess has to offer and try to identify them as we see them. So from here, what I'm seeing is the normal back rank pattern. The king can't move anywhere. He can't capture this pawn because the knight is defending f7. And then there's also this pin. So whenever you see a pin, notice that this piece can't even move. So mate in one, the queen would capture the rook. That's a pretty good one. Let's go to the next one. So from here, let's see what kind of pattern there is. Queen, okay, so the king is in the middle of the board. Let's start to think about the squares the king can go to. King cannot go here. He can go here, so let's highlight that in green. He can't go here right now. The pawn is blocking it. His own pieces are blocking his escape here. My pawn is blocking him from going to e3 because the queen is defending that. And the rook is taking away both the d and e2 squares. So there's only one way to check and block off d4, and that's the rook coming here. Looks good. And then the last one, let's see. So I see right away that there's a checkmate right here, and the queen is all able to follow up my queen, so I can't move my queen to directly give checkmate. However, the king cannot move to these squares because the queen is right now eyeing those up. So he can't move to these squares, and his pieces are blocking all the other ones. There are two ways to give checkmate. Let's see if the engine or if the puzzle lets me do one or the other. I could go either here or I can go here. Let's see. Hey, we got it right. Awesome. The back rank checkmate is one of the most basic ones in the endgame. And it can really happen, it doesn't have to be at the very end of the game. It can happen pretty early on. The key formation is the king can't move because there's 3 pawns blocking him. He may have safely castled one way or the other. In this case, the king is all by himself on the back rank. We can deliver a checkmate in one. Sliding up here, king can't move. We could also, if we wanted to, slide over here. However, he would have an escape square. So we always want to do the quickest mate possible. The staircase mate is one of the most essential mates that you want to be aware of. There's a lot of times where you play around with your opponent and you start getting 2, 3, 4 queens with promoting all your pawns, but you got to know how to deliver checkmate. And it's easiest when you have 2 queens because they're the most powerful pieces. So if you get a pawn on the other side, get a second queen, you can deliver checkmate. So from here, let's see, the best way would be to do what's called the staircase mate. So you can deliver a quick mate in 2 here. And notice that the king can't move forward because of the queen. So we slide up right here. We're taking away all of these squares. And he has to go to the back rank. And then we deliver checkmate. So staircase mate can also be done with 2 queens. That's the quickest way. But you can also do it with 2 rooks. So let's say the only difference here is the rooks don't defend each other. And you have to have them on different files here because otherwise the king will be able to get out. So if it's like this, you can't really check because the king can kind of go back and forth. So you want to have them on different files as I have them right here. And then same idea. The staircase is to take away the squares that he has, slide up here. King has to go backwards. Now if he goes here, with the queens on the board, they would protect diagonally. However, the rooks going here would be a blunder. You'd lose a piece. You could still win, but you have to know how to mate with just a rook. So why have that happen when really you can waste a move, just like we did with the rook box mate. So the rook can slide all the way to the other side of the board. Now the king can't move here, here, or here, or here. He slides away, check. He does the same idea. And you should always do this if you're black defending checkmate, because you want to try to trip up your opponent where possible. Now, again, the rook can't deliver checkmate because the king can now capture the rook. So instead, you want to waste a move, slide as far away as possible while still keeping in mind that the rooks want to be diagonally apart from each other on different files. King would slide over, and then we deliver checkmate with the staircase mate. Let's run through some basic checkmate ideas with just limited pieces on the board. You want to start with this because that's going to help you with your pattern recognition, and then you can slowly start to add other pieces on the board, and they'll be kind of like distractions, but you'll want to look and see this type of pattern as if there's no other pieces. It's just the queen, king, and king just hanging out on the board. Ignore if there's 16 pawns hanging out on the other squares. So in this particular checkmate, there's two ways to go about it. You could do a back rank idea where these squares are taken away by the king, or you can deliver checkmate right away, right here with the queen and king checkmate. So how to get here? You can start with the box idea. The box idea involves really bringing your queen in and taking away the potential to almost as if forcing the king closer and closer to the edge of the board. So first we would want to start with moving into b5, and the king has to, it doesn't have to move back, but if he went here, we would just move and make the box a little bit smaller. You'll notice that this makes a box around the king. So if he were to go here, let's make the box even smaller. It's more of a rectangle now. And if we can't make the box smaller with our queen, because if we were to move here, the king would come forward and the box would be removed. So instead, we want to bring our king into the action. And if the king stays here and tries to create some issues, well, let's force him back as if it's a back rank mate, right? So you could do it here, taking away these three squares, or you could also come into to e6. So we're going to force the king back. Always be careful of stalemates as the king gets closer to the edge of the board and to the corner. Stalemates are more likely, and that a stalemate is when the king is unable to move, but he's not in check. And that since there's no other pieces on the board, the game would end in a draw. So try not to let that happen to you. What could happen is a stalemate. Here's how we deliver checkmate would be, let's say we go here, the king goes here, and something like this. Now the king can't move, but he's not in check. So the game would end. Unfortunately, instead of getting 1 point in a tournament, you would get half of a point. So the queen is the easiest way to deliver checkmate. The rook is the second easiest. And we could do the box mate in the same way as we did with the queen, except we have to be a little bit more careful. So for here, we want to take away as many squares as possible. We could easily slide up one and create the box, make it smaller, but why not try to deliver mate in as quick as possible? So the rook slides up to c6, king moves up. Now we want to try to keep the opposition where possible. Opposition is where the kings are 1 square away from each other, and they're basically staring each other down. So here, the rook really wants to waste a move. So slides away as soon as the king goes back. That's where we want to push him away, because we can see we have the opposition here. Think of it like a back rank checkmate, so the king has to move backwards. So from here, he moves back. We could, there's a couple options here. We could directly take the opposition, but it might take a little bit longer that way. So for here, the king now can't move here because it's checkmate 1, because all 3 of these squares are taken away, and the rook would deliver checkmate right away. So we waste a move, go all the way to the other side of the board, king comes back. Now here's where a lot of newer players might get tripped up. They might do a king move and take the opposition. However, you can do that, it's just going to take a little bit longer, and you want to try to deliver checkmate as quick as possible. So here, moving here, you might end up in kind of a forever unsure exactly how to do it. So the key is actually to waste a move. Wasting a move means not moving the king here, sliding the rook, because he has a lot of squares he can choose from. The only one he doesn't want to go to is going to be g7, because that would be a stalemate right away. So right here, wasting a move anywhere away from the king would be fine. 1 quick move. Now the king has to move. We chase him down. Chase him down. If he ever comes back, we have our dream position and we can deliver checkmate. So wasting a move is key here. And now the king has to move back. He's run out of space. There is no I rank, and we deliver checkmate. Let's take a look at something called the kill box mate. Now when you have the queen and rook on the board, you don't even need to worry about your king. Just get him out of the way. If he's sitting here on f5, slide him somewhere away. Don't even worry about him, because there's chances that you could have a stalemate with the king in the middle of the board. So watch out for that. I would say just get your king away and then focus on the king and queen. And from here we could set up a rook and queen checkmate like this. Slides away, check, and we could do that. However, it's important to understand some other types of checkmate because they could be a little bit quicker and they can appear in the game, as I'll show you in a different example later. So let's go back and we're going to set up the kill box with rook to d4 first. Now the king only has one move. He can only go to e5 in this case. So if you can limit the number of king moves, that's going to help you tremendously. So from here, let's think about where the king can move. The king can really only move to this square, right? So let's force him to the edge of the board with our queen, with queen to d6. So from here, again, has to only do one square, and we just repeat. So as far away from the one side of the board, we can force him all the way to the other side. So the next move, to do the same exact thing. Queen to f4, king only has one square, queen to f6, and now he only has one square, and same idea, except now he's out of moves. Deliver checkmate for the kill box mate, rook to h4. One of my favorite checkmates is definitely the smothered mate, and this is an idea that you can keep in mind in games. A lot of times it might win a rook, but it could also win the game if the pieces are far away. In this case, to deliver checkmate, notice that the king can't move to any of these three squares, and if we were to check him here, the pawn would be able to take my knight. So instead, checkmate in one to smother would be knight to f7. So how to get to this mate? It looks really cool, but there's a common pattern you can look out for, and it's really putting your queen on this diagonal for the king. And usually it wants to be the queen because you can deliver a checkmate. So if the queen slides up with check, the king would go to the corner. And that's pretty ideal for what we want for the smothered mate. But what if he moves out? Well, we got a mate in one with the queen and king checkmate idea, except instead of the king, the knight is protecting the queen. The king can't move anywhere, and he's stuck at the edge of the board. So he can't go there. So if we start to minimize the moves he does have, it makes it a little bit easier for us to deliver this mate. And this one's going to involve a queen sacrifice, which is pretty cool. So the king goes to h8. Now we can check with the knight. Because the king only has one square, he's not smothered yet because the rook is not on g8. So he actually has to slide out here. Now we deliver a double check. So double check, you don't even have to worry about what pieces are on the board. Anytime you see a double check, the king always has to move. And if he were to move to f8, we can deliver checkmate the same way as if the knight were on e5, except now he's on h6. So he can't go there. So instead, he has to come here. And now the checkmate in 2, we deliver checkmate, so the king can't take, but the rook can take. And now we deliver our smother. This checkmate's less common, but it is an idea to keep in mind. Always think about back ranks. Now back ranks, so far we've seen, are really when the king is on the edge of the board and his normal spot. Let's say he's on b8. In this case, it is a back rank because all you have to do is flip the board, and now we've got the king on the edge of the board. It doesn't matter which edge. So right now the king can't come to these squares. We know the pawn's in the way, we know the rook's in the way, but he can't come here because of the knight. So right now, the knight is creating a pseudo back rank, and we can just slide over for Anastasia's checkmate, where it involves the rook and the knight working together to deliver the checkmate. The opera checkmate I've had a couple of times in actual games, which is really, really nice if you can see the pattern. So from here, it usually works with a bishop. It could be a queen as well. Right now we have to deliver check. So rook checks. The king only has one square that he can go to because the bishop is blocking both of these. The pawns are blocking these escape squares, so he has to slide up to b8, and then we deliver checkmate on a8. The king is being squares are taken away from the pawn here. He can't go here because of the rook, and the bishop, as we said, are blocking both these squares while also protecting the rook as well. Surprisingly, the hookmate comes up a lot in speed chess games. It's an interesting pattern that involves the pawn protecting the knight and the rook ultimately delivering checkmate. So from here, the king doesn't have to move, so we want to force him to move. So from here, we have the king can't go to either of these squares. He can come here, but if he comes into this square, I'm going to unhighlight these, the pawn is taking away this square, the pawn is taking away c6 as well, and just like another mate that we looked at in the puzzles, the king can move here, but we want to remove that. So we start with a check going to rook h8. The king has one square that he can move to, and right now, the square we said he still had, we can take away right away. Rook to b8. And it's weird that I've seen this happen a lot, or even the threat of this happens pretty often in some games. So keep that in mind when you're playing. If you're playing a game and you notice that the king can't move anywhere, that's usually a bad sign for your opponent, and you can deliver checkmate in a very simple way. This one's called the David and Goliath. Taking a look at where the king can move, the rook is taking away these squares right here. The king's own squares, our own pieces, are taking away his squares here, and then we've got the pawns blocking both of these. So the question is how to deliver checkmate. If we didn't have any of these squares and the knight were here, we could deliver our hookmate. But since this square is unprotected, it's covered by the white rook, but the king could capture if he moved. A simple pawn move wins the game here, and the king can't move. Another really common mate would be Cozio's checkmate. The way this occurs is usually when there are two pawns and the king is here and you deliver the checkmate with a queen. So from here, we have a check with the queen, sliding him to the only square. I guess he could move here, but if he did, we'd do a mate in two. So if he slid here, I think the quickest way would probably be rook takes bishop, king slides either of these squares, and you deliver checkmate right here. I guess if the king went here, you could do the same thing. So instead, let's say the king slides here. A pattern you want to look for is these two pawns, and then think about your queen checking. Whenever your queen checks, he's taking away, or she's taking away, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 squares. Let me unhighlight these because it's a little confusing. So if the queen slides here, it's covering all of those squares. The pawns kind of doom the king in this scenario. We slide over, and it's checkmate. Neither of these squares can go to. Queen, queen, queen. To help you to visualize how you can see some of these checkmate patterns, I'm going to run through one of my games that I played. It was a 5-0 blitz, and I'm going to quickly run through the game itself, give a couple of thoughts on it, and show you that my thought process for checkmate comes at a certain point, and I'm going to explain when that happened. So this particular opening I was playing as black, and he played the wing gambit, and he gave up 2 pawns very quickly. So my thought process is, okay, the best way to refute a gambit is to accept it. So I'm going to take the pawns and see what happens. So I'm going to fly through some of the next moves because they're not really pertinent to exactly what we're talking about right here. But I'm just setting up, developing my pieces. Everything looks great here. And now I noticed a quick fork, so I thought I'd try it out. It's a blitz game. It's an inaccuracy. But I thought I'd give it a try because I knew that I thought that was the only move. It turns out that he could have slid his queen over. But regardless, I now set up a way to start trading pieces. If he pushes this pawn, I can do a sequence of trades, which I'll show. I capture, capture, capture. Now I'm checking him, so I'm winning the rook back, so he kind of has to take here. And I'm setting up a known checkmate almost. Now it's not a checkmate here, but the idea is that he's almost back ranked because I have my knight taking away 2 key squares, h7 and f7. So I know that he can't move here because then I'll win the rook, and I've already sacrificed a piece, but it would be more of I'd be up in exchange at this point, I believe. So instead, if he goes to the corner, I can also get the exchange back with a fork between the king and the queen. So that's what happens in the game. And at this point, I just start to continue to develop my pieces, and I notice that this knight is now unprotected because the queen moved. So I exchange. If he were to take, I would have taken his knight back with check and taken another pawn. He moves his rook, so I take another pawn. And I gotta say, this is one of the only games where maybe the only game where I've been up 7 pawns to 1, and there's still a decent amount of pieces left on the board. So this is where I start thinking about checkmate patterns, right? Because his king is wide open. I've got no pawns in the way. Half of his pieces, exactly half of his pieces, are on the wrong side of the board. They're on the queen side right now. So I've got to focus on the king side. So I want to double up my rooks so that I can get a little bit of back rank action. And whether I checkmate or win some pieces, that's kind of the goal. So a couple of moves, I just check. This was just to protect the queen coming into f7, possible checkmate ideas. I mean, I've also got this rook. I guess I didn't have to play that move. So the rook comes over here, and now this is where I start thinking about a known mate, the kill box mate. So if he were to, now this is a check because I'm sacrificing a piece because I thought, one, I win the rook right away at the exchange of my rook for his rook and bishop, so I'd be a little bit further up. But if he were to move, the only move he can go is to e7. So if he goes here, I start thinking about the kill box mate. I don't believe it actually works in this scenario, but the kill box mate, if the queen and the bishop were not here would be to slide the rook over here, king slides to d7, queen comes into e3. I think I'm reading the notation backwards. So king comes in here, and if he were to go there, then the rook would slide over to c1. Let me just play that out so you can see what I'm talking about. This is the only move, and if you hold over a piece in Lichess, you can see there's only one square to go to. Check. I'm going to pretend the rook, the queen, and the bishop aren't here in this case. So assuming the queen, the bishop weren't here, he wouldn't be able to go to the square, so he'd go here, and then I would check here, and then queen here, king to a2, and then rook delivering the kill box checkmate. So that was the thought process I had, and I started thinking about it because at this particular scenario, maybe even a few moves earlier, his king was very, very exposed, and I had the rooks ready to slide in on the open c file and deliver some sort of possible checkmate. So the actual checkmate that I delivered in the game was actually Cozio's checkmate. So we've got two different checkmate ideas in one lesson here. So I took the rook because now I'm up in exchange, rook to a bishop, and I just checked him. Just probably I didn't have too much time here, so I was just moving. But he moves into the Cozio. It's a little bit of a backwards Cozio. The Cozio would be if the queen were right here on c5, because the king has these two squares that he actually can't move to. So it's kind of the same thing, except in this case, the pawns are taking away these squares while the rook is taking away this square. And then we've got the traditional Cozio. So there's two checkmates that you could deliver here. One would be queen to g1, and the other one, which is what I play in the game, queen to f2, delivering checkmate. And the king can't move here, and his own pieces are blocking his king from escaping. The second example from a game that I played in Blitz also goes with the idea of a back rank checkmate. So if you'll notice here, the king is not exactly back ranked because he does have the escape square of f2. However, right now, let's just say that the knight were to blunder and move. If my queen were to land here on e1, this square is actually taken away, so it is almost like a back rank. So I have that idea in mind. However, at this exact moment, my rook is unpre and it comes with check. So I figured it was Blitz. You never know, you just kind of try things out. I took the rook, or took the knight, because if he takes me, which he did, and then I block with check, you know, he could check me here, but I guess I would just maybe just go back and forth and it could be a draw. But the other thing is I'm hitting both of his bishops. So right now, his queen's safe. If he were to just kind of slide away, I have mate in one. If he were to... Actually, that's not blocking the checkmate either. So either way, he's kind of has to do this check here, which the engine's pointing out. But part of the reason is I'm blocking both of these bishops, or I'm hitting both of these bishops. So he came out here, check, so I at least win a piece back. So I gave up my rook, I got the knight, and I got the bishop. Engine actually gives me a slight edge right here, and then I like the fact that I can come here, protect this square, and now I've got a pass pawn. So realize that this particular game, I was able to at least keep things even and get a slight edge here. I could have won this game and ended up being a draw, but I had that checkmate idea, and that helped me to further my plans of, you know, giving up my rook. I didn't need it. The rook was actually not really doing anything. If we go back to this square, the rook's kind of biting on a rock, as you say. The bishop is as well. Both of these pieces are very inactive. The only active piece is my queen, and then all three of these pieces are unprotected. So checkmate helped me to even the game and get even a slight edge here. Looking at another game, this one actually involves a back rank again. A back rank is really the simplest mate, so it's really important to study these over and over and try to look out for them in your games. So from here, you can notice that an immediate back rank could be delivered because the king is on the back rank, the g and h pawns are in its way, and he's at the edge of the board. So it's as if he were on g8 and all three pawns, f, g, and h, were still here. So it's the same idea, king is stuck. So from here, I just set up the back rank because he, I guess, kind of blocks the back rank, you could think, because right now I'm threatening checkmate in one. Another thing he could do, I guess, is give up the knight here to block it. It's a completely lost position at this point, so there's a couple different ways I could go. But in this case, he blocks it here, so if I were to just, say, move my knight somewhere, I'm now threatening the back rank idea here. Because if, let's say I move here and he does a nothing move, I'm threatening check and back rank checkmate. So that's an idea, but where to move my knight? So here I move up to f5, and a blunder that loses the game in 2 is here, because this doesn't actually get rid of the back rank, because the knight is, it's as if the pawn didn't move. The knight is doing its job blocking that. And if the queen had taken, you know, I'd have a free queen. So that's really probably one of the only options, or bishop to f8 as it's pointing out. So he goes here, and then there's mate in 2 with the idea of back rank. Sacrificing a queen, bishop takes, and the rook delivers checkmate, the king can't move, and all the other pieces are completely unable to help. I hope these basic checkmate patterns help you to better understand the game, and ideally you can see them in your own games. They do happen often, they're not just in puzzles, but I do recommend playing through those puzzles first, and then you'll start to see them in your own games. Just get that pattern recognition down, and you'll eventually start to nail it. So thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you next time.